I am constantly in tension with institutional desires.
All the time. All the time.
My work exists inherently in a state of tension with institutions.
One thing that's really specific that happens is the person who takes on the role of front-facing or like public outreach, community outreach, or whatever, their body becomes this kind of permeable barrier between, a lack of resources over here, like urgent need and a lack of resources over here, and then the institution over here that's trying to preserve itself and also do things the way that it wants to do things, or it always has done things. And so a lot of the job of the person here, the arts administrator here in the middle, is to, number one, listen to the needs of the community, but also not bring a lot of the stuff that the institution brings to the community as you're asking for the community to do stuff. So I think part of this has also been mediating a sense of production in this time where production feels very strange. Also understanding that like everyone, as brilliant as everyone in this video series is and will be, they have said these words before, and they have been the products of people who have been saying these things before, and there's a certain exhaustion that comes with that, being asked to repeat yourself and potentially even re-traumatize yourself to create frameworks of understanding for other people. That is a very real thing, is being that person in the middle and knowing that role of negotiation is kind of an unspoken, uncompensated labor of the job.
I walk into boardrooms and on stages where people do not think I belong there, where people have already come with knives out, with a desire to minimize, to invalidate, to destroy, and to battle me. So in a lot of ways, just look at the body that I'm in, just look at the intersections that I live inside of. My work exists inherently in a state of tension with institutions, although it doesn't always speak directly to them. They're not my North Star, they are not my Mecca. I'm not pointed at institutions and in dialogue with them and responding to them. I'm not spending all my energy critiquing these institutions, only when I'm being paid to do so, and only in limited capacities, and only in ways that I feel it could aid in transformation. Although I make mistakes in that too. Cultural institutions, I think, particularly here in Canada, and I say this as someone who's had a culturally pluralistic upbringing and a multinational upbringing, that really sort of gives me a way to put some parameters around Canadian culture, and specifically Canadian cultural institutions are unable to contend with Blackness beyond subject, object, or problem. Blackness is never the cultural producer, never the artist, never the voice of authority, never the voice of experience. It's the fetish, the token, the thing to be managed, controlled, understood, critiqued, debated, validated, invalidated, objectively proven or disproven, so on and so forth. So these cultural institutions are active co-conspirators in exercises of nation building in Canada that help curate that false narrative of Canadian innocence. The meanwhile in Canada, unlike our neighbors to the south, we don't do X, Y, or Z, or we have no histories of this thing or that thing. Cultural institutions are really lacking in the fundamental interpersonal skills, the fundamental consideration of safety, the ability to distinguish between discomfort and harm that is required to meaningfully engage Black artists. So my existence in, around, and outside of them is an inherent place of tension. In terms of working with institutions, it's interesting. They often expect that they're gonna invite me and that invitation is some kind of benevolent favor for which I should be grateful, and that in that invitation there's some kind of transaction in which I'm going to give them the language of anti-racism, anti-oppression, social justice, Black experience, right? As the resident authority clearly is the insider informant or the native informant of Black experience, which is a fallacy and a disaggregated we, as Dion Brand calls it, that is really only existing in the white imagination, in the white psyche, this singularness of Blackness, that really expects that I'll be able to transact that for some amount of money and they'll get that and it'll be done, that it's a prescription or a destination, and that their mere transactional engagement with me is going to arrive at that, or that it's going to be more beneficial for me than it is for them, when in reality their proximity, particularly to like an outwardly and explicitly critical voice like mine, buys them a legitimacy that they don't actually have. It's an inherent relationship of tokenization, so it's a constant tension, having to put the fullness of my life in a box marked other, if I'm even given that box to begin with. So I would say, yeah, I'm constantly engaging with these tensions. As a cultural producer, I'm engaging with these tensions as a organizer. I'm engaging with these tensions as a Black person, just trying to survive this planet at this particular moment in time, as a queer person, as a woman, as a Muslim, as an immigrant, as a Nubian person, as a intergenerationally displaced, colonized, traumatized person, participating in a settler project and dealing with all the ramifications of that.
Whatever work it is, it's always been in tension with institutional desires. I think I'll answer this question in relation to my youth work, because that's the work that tends to engage with the institution the most. So like I mentioned with my personal creative practice, like I turned away from engaging with the Western art world and those institutions. But for the youth work, those programs usually take place in an institution. I think we deserve space within those places, but also having those programs rooted in an institution gives youth, like, they feel like they belong, they feel like they have a place, they feel recognized in their work. So that's another reason why that program interacts with institutions. Always, it's always in tension with my work. I think the greatest problem for me in running these programs within an institutional space was just that often what I was trying to do was incomprehensible to the institution. Like they couldn't understand why I wanted to pay and value the work of youth. They couldn't understand why I needed long stretches of time to work with youth, because we weren't looking at art as just, a product or something you learn, but as like actual relationship building, and it actually takes time and energy and love and care. So that was my greatest issue in the institution. I think it's important with this question too to really name that institutions are the building blocks of settler colonialism. So, we have colonialism. It's a structure made up of many different structures of power, things like white supremacy or cis heteropatriarchy, like all of these things interact to create colonialism. But below that, there are building blocks that uphold those structures of power, and institutions are those building blocks. And I think often like arts institutions get seen as like liberal and neutral places, but they're not. Like they replicate those power structures. They are founded and built on those power structures. So for me to come into a space specifically seeking to disrupt those power structures and to teach youth how to disrupt those power structures and to teach them how to revolt against those power structures, it just, obviously doesn't work. So there are lots of tensions, and I would say more than tensions. There's violence that happens, there's harms that happen. I'm like in the institution fighting for the space we deserve, but also doing a lot of protecting. And there's been times where, that have really harmed myself and the people that I work with. And so in recent years, I've actually moved away from working with institutions. So I went from, rooting the program in an institution and working for that institution and doing that work and being like, I just lost 20 years of my life from working here for a year, to kind of like a keeping my distance from institutions, like maybe partnering, but in a really autonomous way, towards now maybe leaving them behind completely and looking at ways that we can house like exhibition spaces in more community centered spaces, always in tension with institutional desires.
I am constantly in tension with institutional desires. Part of that is because these institutions are colonial institutions. They are founded on ideas around their relation to Indigenous people that are extractive and exploitative, especially Ryerson University, an institution that carries the name of somebody who theorized around education and helped bring the idea of residential schools into being. Ryerson was someone who thought that Indigenous people were meant for agricultural work. He didn't believe that young girls should be educated past a elementary school level. He advocated for the creation of schools for Indigenous people that would be boarding schools, that would remove children, Indigenous children, from their families, that would educate them in a church denominational setting, that would remove them from their language practices and educate them in English, that would segregate the girls and the boys. The products of this theory of education resulted in the destructive and genocidal residential school system. This institution still carries his name. So, of course, the desires of the institution are suspect. I think that this university has done a lot of work and is continuing to do work towards the goal of what they call reconciliation. I think that means for me that I still question and challenge and really am wary of the institution's expectations of me and of their intentions. And that goes for thinking about the university as a bigger system, not just a single institution. My first semester of teaching in this position was, the beginning of it was done from the bush at an Indigenous land reoccupation. Some of my students commented that it looked like I was teaching and doing lectures from a forest, and I was, in fact, in a forest with a really shoddy internet connection, really pixelated videos. It was difficult to try and maintain that teaching requirements and the requirements of this institution and of my work, while also supporting the work of land defense and supporting this Indigenous community. I had to have a backup plan for what would happen to my class responsibilities if I was arrested again. I think things like this are maybe not fully considered when these hiring processes go through. I'm not sure people know what it takes to actually support Indigenous students and Indigenous faculty within these institutions. And for a lot of us, we carry deep and enduring responsibilities to Indigenous communities. And that may mean family responsibilities. It may mean helping with these projects and campaigns to push back against the destruction of our territories. It may mean participation in ceremony. There's all sorts of responsibilities that we hold that become difficult to hold and to really attend to when we take on all that comes along with an academic position. And so I think there's a lot of work to do. If we're not going to feel like we're always in tension, if we're not going to feel like we're always being sort of torn between these spaces and these different forms of responsibility. Because those responsibilities to our communities and to our people are not things that we're willing to give up to take these positions. And so I think that's a place where it's the institution and our colleagues and the schools and departments that we're a part of, it's their responsibility to help us figure out how to balance it without burning ourselves out, because we're not gonna stop attending to our relations in our Indigenous communities. I think additionally there's a tension between the kinds of research that are valued and held up, and then the kinds of research that are possible within Indigenous communities to do in a responsible way. I think there's a real lack of theory around what it means to do trauma-based research, both as an Indigenous researcher and as a community who may be engaging from that side. A lot of the issues that we're attending to and trying to analyze, and these systems of oppression that we're living within, are deeply painful to talk about. And so the research process itself is painful, often for both the researcher and the community. And I think that needs attention. And so that also, I think, causes tension between my own needs and the community's needs and what the institution is able to offer in terms of support for the kinds of projects that I'm engaged in.